I never thought that my son stealing from me would end up being the moment I finally took my life back. I was standing in my kitchen on Beatty's Ford Road, holding the empty velvet box like it might still be warm from his hand. My hand was trembling, not from age, but from fury so sharp it made my molars ache. That bracelet, my mother's wedding gift from 1948, was the last thing I owned that still smelled like her perfume when you opened the box. Langston had taken it without a word, sold it. Spent the money on some gaudy Cartier thing for that wife of his, Chanel, who walks through my house like it's a waiting room. He stood there in my doorway saying, "You've had it forever, Ma. It's just collecting dust." And I could see that smug ease he inherited from his father, who walked out in '87 and never looked back. The same shrug, the same lopsided smile when they've already decided your feelings are irrelevant. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I closed the drawer slow and said, "Soon, something else will be gone too." Then walked past him and picked up the phone. Mechanics and Farmers still answers on the second ring if you ask for a person. Mr. Ellis Rhodes had been my banker for over 20 years. He handled my retirement rollover, helped me lock in a fixed rate for the condo, even called me when my CD matured. I asked him to pull up the family trust, quietly. "No changes yet," I said, "but we'll need a suspension of distributions and a pending access review by Monday." His voice didn't flinch, but I heard the shift. He said, "I'll make a note and call legal." Langston was still in the kitchen when I hung up. He looked at me like I'd slapped him, and maybe I had, in the only way I could now. At 2:15 p.m., Mr. Rhodes confirmed the trust suspension request was logged, and the next fiduciary board review would be Friday at 9 a.m. Langston didn't know it yet, but I just slammed the first door he couldn't walk back through. Langston never asked how I got that bracelet in the first place. He just saw it as old gold waiting to be flipped. But that set belonged to my mother, Corinne Holloway, who scrubbed hospital floors for 31 years and never bought herself a new coat if we needed school shoes. I'm Darlene Patrice Holloway. I'm 68 years old, and I've spent every year since 1987 building a life out of ash and overtime. I worked dispatch for Charlotte Area Transit until my knees gave out, and I never once called out sick. I took double shifts when Langston had braces, worked holidays when his football team needed fees covered. I learned how to stretch a grocery list and talk down insurance reps like a trial attorney. Every piece of furniture in this condo was bought cash. Every plate, every lamp, every towel, I chose, saved for, and brought home myself. So when my only son turned around and robbed me with a smile, I didn't just feel violated. I felt erased. He was 4 when his father left. Vernon Holloway packed one duffel bag and his saxophone, said he needed space to find his sound, and drove off with $300 I'd loaned him for a tire that didn't exist. Never paid it back. Last I heard, he was gigging out in Savannah, playing jazz for drunk tourists, and living off whatever woman he'd conned into housing him. I never filed for child support. I figured dragging a snake into court wouldn't make him a father. So I did it myself. Langston was never hungry, never cold, never lacking. I bought him encyclopedias when he asked, not games. I sat through his tantrums, his heartbreaks, his silence. I forgave the weed in his sock drawer and the lies about night classes. But this, stealing what wasn't his to touch, this wasn't immaturity or poor judgment. It was a decision. A line crossed by someone who had come to believe I owed him everything. By the end of that week, I'd scheduled an appointment with attorney Brenda Clemens, who handled my estate in 2018. I added power of inheritance reassessment to the agenda. Langston used to stop by unannounced, carrying takeout and complaining about work. That's how sons check in when they're grown. They bring food and sit at your table like it's still theirs. But over the last 2 years, those visits got fewer. Colder. Then Chanel started showing up, trailing synthetic vanilla, and looking around like she was casing the place. They'd whisper near the mantel, scoff at my drapes, call my dishes vintage like it was a polite insult. She once leaned into Langston's side and muttered, "I thought you said she kept this place cleaner." He laughed. I brushed it off. I always brush it off. When they took a beach trip last summer and posted group photos I wasn't invited to, I turned the comments off and kept quiet. When they hosted Thanksgiving, using my own condo, my folding tables, my silver chafing set, and told me the morning of, saying, "We thought it'd be easier this way," I stood in the hallway and smiled through it. But that morning I found the pawn slip tucked behind a stack of mail in the hall closet. I knew they'd done more than disrespect me. They'd stolen. Uptown Jewel Exchange. Ticket number 448,197. $4,800. It was dated 2 days before Chanel's birthday. The moment I saw it, I walked straight to my bedroom and checked the safe. Jewelry boxes rearranged. One set missing. That pink velvet square, empty. I sat on the edge of my bed and stared at the open safe for 5 full minutes before I shut the door and locked it, though I knew it wouldn't matter anymore. They'd crossed the line people don't come back from, not because of the money, not even the history, but because they decided I didn't deserve honesty. Chanel's bracelet came from my mother's wrist. Langston knew it. He didn't care. That evening, I printed 2 copies of the pawn ticket, sealed one in my household file, and slid the other into my purse. At 10:03 a.m. the next morning, Attorney Clemens's office confirmed my Tuesday appointment. Trust reassessment would be the first item on the docket. Naomi and I have been neighbors for 17 years, but she's been my truth teller longer than that. She raised 3 sons, buried one, and knows exactly what it means to smile while your child ruins you. Now, when I told her what Langston had done, I wasn't ready for the words she gave me. I barely got the story out before she dropped her casserole dish on the floor, sweet potato, still hot, and said, "Baby, that ain't just betrayal. That's financial abuse." She didn't say it with heat. She said it like a nurse reading a chart. Then she went and got her iPad. We sat at my kitchen table, same one Langston used to do homework on, and opened a new document. Naomi titled it Stolen Items, Holloway Estate. She told me not to guess. Only include what I could prove with pictures, receipts, appraisals, or memory tied to a date. If it ends up in court, emotion won't matter, she said, but a paper trail will. So I went to work. First was the bracelet, of course. 14K rose gold, floral etching, passed down from Corinne Holloway, valued in 1997 at $8,200. I had 2 photos of it from Christmas 2012 and one of Mama wearing it in a Polaroid from '73. Naomi uploaded all 3, labeled each file, and logged the estimated resale value based on today's market. I added the matching earrings, never worn, still in the box, and the sapphire pin I'd last seen in May but hadn't thought to check. Then came the little things. The gold cufflinks Vernon left behind. Langston never wore suits, but they were gone. A carved ivory comb from Mississippi, and the silk jewelry pouch missing from the dresser drawer. Naomi typed, cataloged, backed up every file to Dropbox and Google Drive. "You're building your leverage," she said. At 4:45 p.m., I printed the list and initialed the bottom. Naomi took a photo of each page and showed me how to timestamp it. We weren't just grieving anymore. We were documenting. And documenting means the truth can't be ignored. Trust only goes so far when you've spent decades covering the bill. And I kept every receipt. Not out of suspicion, but because I was always the one who'd be blamed if something went wrong. So I learned early, document the outlay, stack the statements, and never loan what you can't call a gift. Langston's whole adult life had been financed on my belief that he just needed time. When he dropped out sophomore year, I didn't ask for a refund. I paid Johnson C. Smith University over $42,000 between tuition, books, housing, and food cards. Every canceled check still sits in my tax folders. When his first marriage crumbled, I let him move back in with no rent, no curfew, no judgment. Just rules about groceries and laundry that he ignored anyway. Then came COVID. He lost his job, or said he did, and I covered his credit card to avoid late fees. $3,000 and change. I had it paid off in 2 months, called the bank myself. No thanks, no payback. And when he said they needed a bigger car for family road trips, I put $10,000 down on a hybrid Lexus. It was in his name, but my money. He sent one photo, Chanel grinning behind the wheel like she earned it. I wasn't foolish. I just kept thinking that sacrifice would translate to respect. That night, after Naomi left, I opened the plastic bin I keep in the hall closet marked Langston Finance, and laid everything out: receipts, bank stubs, printed emails. I organized them into 4 folders: education, emergency loans, vehicle, and household. The total amount I had poured into him since age 18 crossed $60,000. And that didn't count groceries, clothes, or the times I just slipped him cash to keep him from overdrafting. At 10:20 a.m. the next day, I emailed the folder titles and totals to Attorney Clemens with the subject line: Preliminary Financial Support Summary, Langston Holloway. Her assistant confirmed receipt by 12:04 p.m. Let them call me bitter. I call it record keeping. Langston changed the safe code 6 months ago. Said it was just in case. In case of what, he never explained. We were in the living room, and he was fiddling with the remote like the news bored him. "You should really update your code, Ma," he said, all casual. "Something stronger. 4-digit ain't safe anymore." I let him talk. I was tired. My knees were flaring up, and I was halfway through balancing my checkbook. He offered to help. "You always forget the combination anyway," he added, like he was doing me a favor. I gave in. Told him the old code, 0429, my mama's birthday, and watched him punch in something new. "I'll text it to you," he said. He never did. At the time, I chalked it up to carelessness. Langston forgets things, moves too fast, always promising to follow up. I didn't press. But I should have. That safe held not just jewelry, but my original deed paperwork, my life insurance copies, and 2 hand-stitched letters from my mother. That safe was mine, both legally and emotionally, and he locked me out of it like I was a guest in my own home. The day I realized the code had never been sent, I tried to ask. He brushed me off. "I'll give it to you later, Ma. Don't stress." I let it go. Weeks passed, then months. I stopped asking. Now I know why. He had access. I didn't. That was the setup. That was the power shift. And he used it to plan a quiet heist while I made his favorite black-eyed peas and stocked the guest bathroom with fresh towels. That afternoon, I bought a new fireproof safe, paid cash at Staples, $219, had the clerk carry it to my car. When I got home, I moved every critical document out of the old one and into the new. The old safe stayed where it was, empty now. Let him check it next time he snoops. Let him wonder. At 5:17 p.m., I registered the new safe under my own password-protected ID and logged the serial number. Nobody else would have the code. Not anymore. Langston never liked paperwork. When he was a boy, I had to sign his field trip slips and remind him to write his name on homework. But lately, his questions had gotten sharper, too precise. They didn't come all at once. They came in pieces, tucked into errands and small talk, like he was fishing for facts without raising flags. One morning over coffee, he asked, "Ma, you ever insure the jewelry?" Just like that, mid-sip, like he was asking about the weather. I said yes. He nodded and changed the subject. Next week, he stopped by with croissants and asked where I kept the original will, said Chanel's cousin was going through probate drama, and he wanted to learn. I told him it was handled. "Just curious," he said, grinning too wide. The one that hit wrong came when he glanced up from his iPad and asked if I'd updated anything recently. "Like legal stuff, in case something happens." He said it with fake innocence, like a boy testing boundaries. That's when I saw it, an email on his screen he forgot to minimize. The subject line said appraisal attached. Urgent. My breath caught, but I didn't let it show. I asked if he needed help setting up his own estate plan. He laughed. "Nah. Just trying to be proactive." I excused myself, walked down the hall, and closed my bedroom door. Sat on the edge of the bed with my pulse thudding in my ears. That wasn't curiosity, that was reconnaissance. Later that evening, I made a list of every time he'd asked a financial or legal question in the past 3 months. There were 9. I wrote each one down with the date and what he was holding when he said it. His phone, his tablet, a cup of coffee. Every detail mattered now. At 9:12 a.m. the next day, I emailed that list to Attorney Clemens under the subject line, Possible Premeditation Pattern, Langston Holloway. Her paralegal replied by 11:34 a.m. and added a new bullet to our Tuesday agenda, air access inquiries and asset probing. Langston was casing the estate like a man planning an exit strategy, and I was done handing over answers. I wasn't invited to Chanel's birthday dinner. That didn't surprise me. But I went anyway. Pressed shirt, polite smile, bottle of red wine they never opened. The restaurant sat nestled in South Park, one of those modern places with black chairs and overpriced butter. I kept to myself at the far end of the table next to her friend Lacey, who called me Miss D, and asked if I'd always lived in Charlotte like I was a museum exhibit. I said yes. Then I listened. Chanel had always been loud when she wanted attention, and with enough drinks, she turned that volume into performance. Around the second course, she lifted her wrist high and waved it like she was swatting away compliments. The bracelet caught the light, my mother's bracelet, and someone at the table gasped. "Ooh, Cartier," one of the girls said. Chanel laughed, full and theatrical. I told Lang he better upgrade my wrist before 30 hits. Can't be walking around here looking basic. She tilted her arm to show off the band. Gold. Floral detail. The same clasp I'd polished every Christmas since 1992. Langston smirked like a man who thought he'd done something noble. I said nothing. I watched her film a quick video for her story, bracelet front and center. Then I pulled out my phone under the table and captured every second. Screen recording, screenshots, the whole gallery. Caption read, "When he loves you in Cartier, not questions." Like the history didn't matter. Like it wasn't already stolen twice. Once from my drawer, then again in the telling. I left before the dessert menu hit the table. Later that night, I pulled the footage into a private folder labeled Proof, Jewelry Misuse. It sat next to the pawn ticket, the insurance appraisal, and the photos of my mother's hand wearing the same bracelet. Chanel didn't know it yet, but her story wasn't just public. It was now part of the record. They weren't careful because they didn't think they had to be. They never imagined the person keeping receipts was me. That night, I confronted him. Not over dinner, not gently. I stood in my own living room and asked him straight. "Did you sell my mother's bracelet to buy Chanel that Cartier?" He barely looked up from his phone. "You're being too emotional, Ma." Not a denial, not even surprise. I repeated the question. This time, louder. He sighed, like I was making a scene. "It's not like that," he said. "She deserves something elegant, something real, not old stuff." Then he laughed, like he thought he was being generous, like I should be proud he upgraded the past. It hit me that he didn't just steal. He rewrote the meaning, turned an heirloom into a trade-in, acted like Chanel had earned a reward, and I was the one clinging to junk. That bracelet came through 3 generations of women who wore it with pride and caution, women who never had much but knew what mattered. And now it was part of a birthday outfit. I didn't cry, I didn't yell, I left the room. In the hallway, I stopped. Not because I doubted myself, but because I realized he'd already moved on. They both had. Every dinner skipped, every group text I was left off, every plan made without me. They weren't slips, they were signals. I was no longer part of their version of family. I was the furniture. Useful when needed, silent when not. I stood there, staring at the family photo on the wall. Langston at 7, holding his kindergarten diploma like it was a degree. Back then, he thought I knew everything. Now, he saw me as an obstacle. A locked box he finally found the key to. I made one decision before bed. I wouldn't ask again. Wouldn't explain the value. Wouldn't beg for return. If they could cut me out of their circle, I'd cut them out of my estate. Before I turned in, I pulled my file box from the closet and placed it beside the bed. In the morning, I'd open it and start making revisions. The bracelet was gone, but I still had the pen. At 6:45 the next morning, I sat on the edge of my bed and stared at the safe like it might explain something. It didn't. The room was quiet, too quiet. No TV, no gospel station humming from the kitchen, no coffee dripping, just me, the carpet, and a space where trust used to live. I didn't cry. I opened the safe, checked every box inside. The cufflinks were gone. The silk pouch was gone. The pearl pin with the bent clasp, also gone. I counted 3 empty slots where there used to be heirlooms, and it settled in my chest like bricks. Langston hadn't just taken one thing. He'd been chipping away piece by piece. Quietly. Confidently. Like I'd never notice. That's when I knew. They may have taken the jewelry, but they weren't going to take my future. Not my name, not my choices. I'd spent my life protecting Langston, from bills, from hunger, from shame. I'd let that protection keep going long after he stopped needing it. But this wasn't protection anymore, it was permission. And I was done giving it. So I reached for the file labeled Family Trust Holloway and laid it flat across my lap. Inside were the documents I'd updated after Mama passed, when I was still hopeful, when I thought Langston would be the one to carry the family forward. The trust had a modest balance, but the structure was solid. Distributions, property transfer, medical power of attorney, all written in his favor. Until now. I picked up the phone and dialed Mr. Rhodes at the bank. He'd handled the trust setup in 2002, helped me revise it in 2018. When he answered, I said clearly, I need to suspend all distributions and revoke named access to the Holloway Trust, effective immediately. He didn't ask why. Just said, understood, Mrs. Holloway. I'll begin the internal freeze and send you the confirmation package by mail. I hung up, stood, and carried the folder back to the safe, but not the old one. The new fireproof safe sat in my closet now, locked under my own code. That morning, I reclaimed something more important than jewelry. I reclaimed my authority. Once you pull the financial plug, the silence comes quick. By noon, that same day, I had done more in 4 hours than I used to do in a week. First call was Mr. Rhodes again. I confirmed the suspension of all pending distributions from the trust and asked him to flag the account for any attempted withdrawals. He promised to place a temporary hold pending legal review. I thanked him and moved to the next step without blinking. Langston still had access to the supplementary Fidelity card tied to my account. That was my mistake, one I let drag on too long. I logged in and canceled it myself. 2 clicks. Gone. The last statement showed Uber Eats, digital games, and some nonsense from a high-end sneaker app. $212 just in food deliveries alone. He hadn't even bothered to hide it. I deactivated the card and locked the account for good measure. When it asked for a reason, I selected unauthorized use. Then I called Fidelity and had a representative walk me through removing Langston from all beneficiary roles, starting with the investment accounts and retirement distributions. She read everything back twice. Are you sure you want to proceed with this removal? I told her I was. By the time I hung up, I felt no panic. Just air, like the weight had shifted to where it belonged. My hands weren't shaking. My voice didn't catch. I kept a list on the notepad beside me. Trust frozen, card canceled, account access revoked, new password set. Each time I drew a line through a task, it felt like reclaiming another inch of my life. Once the accounts were locked down, I turned to the paperwork. No more relying on memory or family lore. This time, I was building a record no one could dispute. I started with the photos. Digital first. Every picture I had of the stolen pieces, every birthday, holiday, or graduation where I'd worn them, I copied into a folder labeled Holloway Heirlooms Evidence. Then I printed each one on matte paper and labeled the backs with dates and events in my handwriting. Not for court, for clarity. The original insurance appraisal from 1997 took some digging. It was buried under my mortgage documents, brittle from age, but still legible. $8,200. Signed, notarized, and sealed in a plastic sleeve. I scanned it, saved it twice, then slipped the hard copy into a red folder marked Appraisals, Verified. The next step was the will. I'd updated it in 2018, back when I still believed Langston would take care of things after I was gone. He was listed as executor. Naomi was listed only as a backup. That changed before lunchtime. I made 3 new copies of the will and started drafting a codicil to officially remove him as executor. Naomi would take his place. Someone with no agenda, no hunger for jewelry or titles, someone who had actually held my hand through real pain. I called Attorney Clemens' office and left a message requesting the codicil language for immediate inclusion. By then, the dining table looked like a war room. Folders, manila envelopes, sticky notes, old photographs, scanned receipts. I wasn't tired. I felt steady. Like a woman who had finally pulled her power out of storage and set it on display. Before the afternoon ended, I made 3 backup copies of every key file. One on a flash drive, one in the cloud, one in a folder Naomi could access if needed. Nothing would disappear without a trace again, not while I was still breathing. Let Langston and Chanel pose for cameras. I had documents, timestamps, and a notarized trail. Proof doesn't need to raise its voice. Once I had the files in order, I reached for my allies, the kind that don't flinch when you tell them your child betrayed you. Naomi was first. I walked next door with a copy of the updated will, a flash drive, and a mug of lemon tea. I didn't say much, just handed her the documents and said, "It's official now. You're the one I trust to handle everything when the time comes." She didn't blink, just took my hand and said, "Let's get it all scanned." Her dining table became our operations hub. She opened Dropbox and uploaded everything, file by file, making sure the names were clear and the order precise. "Redundancy is safety," she said, and showed me how to set access permissions. We gave Jermaine limited view, just in case. Jermaine's my cousin on my mother's side, and he's been with CMPD for over a decade. Knows how to read a room, knows when not to file something, and when to file it with extra eyes on it. I called him that evening, told him what happened, didn't dress it up. He said quietly, "You want to do this the formal way or the smart way?" I said both. He walked me through the first steps. How to log a non-emergency property report without triggering an arrest or civil escalation. He explained how to document verbal conversations legally and what kind of language crosses the line into coercion or financial abuse. I took notes. I didn't cry. Later that week, Pastor Keyshawn stopped by with a peach cobbler and stayed for an hour. When I told him the story, he shook his head and said, "You raised him, but you don't owe him your ruin." Then he offered to host a community witness session if things turned public. "Don't let shame do their work for them," he said. "You've got folks ready to stand with you." That night, I printed a fresh copy of the trust file and added a new section labeled Support Statements and Contacts. Not everything needed to be legal. Some of it just needed to be witnessed. I waited until the house was quiet before drafting the letter. Not an email. Not a text. A certified, return receipt required letter. One that would sit heavy in his hands and carry more weight than any voicemail ever could. I opened a fresh Word document and typed his full name at the top like I didn't know him. Because in this matter, I didn't. I knew the boy I raised. This was a man who stole from me with a straight face. I kept the tone civil but precise. No accusations, just facts. I stated clearly that he had removed heirloom property from my possession without consent. I outlined the items in question: the bracelet, the earrings, the pin, referencing the original appraisal and supporting photographs. I noted the pawn ticket number. I cited his Instagram post through Chanel's account as corroborating evidence of resale or gifting. And I named the trust, the estate, and the legal status of all inherited items as governed by North Carolina law. Then came the deadline. He had until November 15th to return the property in full and in its original condition, or present a documented explanation of its whereabouts. Failure to do so would result in escalation, civil, legal, and communal. I made sure to include the phrase misappropriation of heirloom assets and breach of familial fiduciary trust, both of which Attorney Clemens had helped me phrase. At the bottom, I signed my name in pen, not Mom, Darlene Patrice Holloway. I printed 2 copies, one for my files, one for the envelope. Naomi watched me slide the letter into the certified mail slip and seal it. We walked it to the post office together, like it was a ceremony. I paid extra for tracking and made sure the clerk stamped the receipt twice. One copy went into my evidence folder. There would be no more hallway conversations, no more closed-door favors. Everything from here on out would be written, documented, and timed. And when he opened that envelope, he would feel exactly what it meant to be put on notice by the woman who once gave him everything. He came 3 days after the letter was delivered, knocking like he still lived there, 2 sharp taps, then nothing. I didn't rush to answer. I let him stand there. Let the weight of that silence sit on his shoulders for once. When I opened the door, he looked rough around the edges. Eyes tired, shirt wrinkled like it had been pulled from a pile. Behind him, Chanel sat in the car, sunglasses on, phone in hand, not even pretending to come up the walkway. He started with, "Ma, can we talk?" Like this was a misunderstanding, not a pattern. I didn't step aside. I told him we could talk right there on the stoop. His face twisted for a second, offended I wouldn't let him in, but he covered it quick. "You didn't need to do all that," he said. "The letter, the legal stuff. We could have handled this privately." I kept my arms crossed. "That window is closed," I said. "You chose silence. I chose paper." He said he'd been stressed, that things had gotten out of hand, that he hadn't meant to take anything permanently. He kept tossing words out like they might land softly. Temporary, sentimental, misunderstanding. I let him talk. I wanted to hear what his excuses sounded like out loud. He never once said sorry. I told him the situation was no longer personal, it was procedural. I reminded him of the return deadline, the itemized list, the lack of communication, the documented misuse of trust assets. "You're not here to explain," I said. "You're here to react." He glanced back at the car. Chanel didn't look up. "You're really going to do this to your own son?" he asked. I didn't blink. "No," I said. "You did this. I'm just naming it." He left without a handshake, without a promise to return anything. Just turned and walked back to the car, jaw tight. The door shut hard behind him. I stepped back inside and marked the calendar. 3 days since delivery, no resolution offered. The countdown to formal action had begun. By 11 a.m. on November 3rd, we were seated around a rectangular conference table at Bank of America on Trade Street. Not a courtroom, but it might as well have been. Mr. Rhodes had arranged the meeting after reviewing the account freeze and trust violations. He said it would be, quote, clarifying. Langston sat at the far end, arms folded, lips pressed thin. Chanel sat beside him, silent, phone face down for once. I came with a red folder and my back straight. Pastor Keyshawn took the 4th chair. The room had a screen on the wall, clean, corporate, unflinching. Mr. Rhodes began with the trust documents. He walked through the original terms, the intended inheritance path, and the violations that triggered the suspension. Calm voice. Neutral tone. Then he detailed the appraisal records, flagged transactions, and the current legal posture of the estate. No embellishments, just facts stacked like bricks. I didn't speak until he finished. Then I opened my folder and laid out each piece. Printed screenshots of Chanel's Instagram post, the pawn shop ticket, the appraisal report with original signatures. I placed them on the table one by one, like laying down cards in a hand they hadn't realized I'd been holding. No drama, just proof. Chanel burst first. Her voice cracked, something between disbelief and panic. "You're really doing this? Over some old jewelry?" Langston didn't stop her. He just stared at the table. I stayed seated. "That jewelry belonged to 3 generations before you," I said. "You wore it on social media like it was a prop?" No one answered. Mr. Rhodes finished the meeting by handing Langston the formal trust revocation letter, signed and dated, with a copy for his records. Pastor Keyshawn closed with a prayer. Not for reconciliation, for clarity. As we left the room, I felt no triumph, just precision. A clean boundary where the mess used to be. I had done what needed doing. Nothing more, nothing less. On the way out, I touched the inside pocket of my coat, where I tucked the notarized copy of the updated will. It hadn't been needed yet. Once the meeting ended, nobody lingered. Chanel stormed out first, heels loud against the tile, muttering into her phone before the doors even closed behind her. Langston followed slower, shoulders slumped, one hand gripping the trust revocation letter like it might change shape if he stared long enough. He didn't say a word to me. Didn't even look back. I stayed behind to finish the record. Mr. Rhodes handed me a printed summary of the trust activity. Dates, freeze notices, authorization changes, the timeline in black and white. Then he reviewed the digital transfer logs to show exactly when Langston had last accessed any accounts tied to my estate. It had been 2 days after the birthday dinner, the same day Chanel posted the bracelet. I didn't react, I just added the summary to my folder. Then I slid across the screenshots, Chanel's posts, captioned and dated. The pawn ticket with her name listed as item recipient. The email Langston had sent Uptown Jewel Exchange asking about appraisal timelines, forwarded to me by Naomi, who found it saved in the shared Google Drive backup. I didn't explain the images, they spoke louder than I could. Mr. Rhodes nodded and asked if I'd like everything notarized for legal filing. I said yes. 15 minutes later, I walked out with stamped copies of every document in my possession. Langston might pretend it was all a misunderstanding, but misunderstanding doesn't generate a signed receipt or an insurance violation. On the sidewalk outside, I paused. Everything I needed to say had been said. Not in speeches, but in statements. Legal ones, financial ones. The kind of language you can't talk your way around. By the time I got home, the only thing left was to secure the house. Naomi met me at the door. I handed her a small white envelope containing the newly cut keys to my condo, the same locks I'd had reinstalled 2 days prior, without telling Langston. She took them, without question. Some dust never settles. It clears the view. And I had never seen my life more clearly than I did right then. The next morning, I made myself coffee and sat by the window like I hadn't in months. No folders on the table. No papers spread like armor. Just my cup, the hum of the refrigerator, and quiet. Real quiet. Not the kind that feels like waiting, but the kind that means something's finally ended. Langston hadn't called. I didn't expect him to. He'd received every document, heard every fact, and saw, maybe for the first time, that love with conditions cuts both ways. He chose silence when I needed truth. Now I chose distance. I walked through the condo slowly, touching the backs of chairs, adjusting frames. Not mourning, claiming. Each room was mine again. My space, my rules. The new safe sat bolted in the back closet, locked tight. My mother's letters inside. Her memory finally secure. Naomi stopped by around noon with groceries and a laugh. "You look lighter," she said, unpacking greens and sweet potatoes like nothing had changed. But everything had. I handed her the revised estate file, clean, clear, no trace of Langston's name. She flipped to the page that named her executor. "You sure about this?" she asked. I was. Because protection isn't just about what you leave behind. It's about what you refuse to let be taken. I poured her a glass of iced tea, the late sun catching the rim of the glass. No more bargaining. No more waiting to be seen. The view was mine now.